I'd like to change tack now slightly, sticking though on the theme of insurance in particular. And our final presentation for the day is Georgia Whitbread from IAG, Russel Wise from CSIRO, and Jack Pollock from NAB will be presenting to us on partnering differently to drive impact, a resilience investment vehicle pilot. A little bit of a change of pace here in that Georgia is going to run this as a more of a discussion, fireside chat type exercise. So there'll be a good opportunity as part of that for Q&A throughout rather than just at the end. So can I strongly encourage you to please pop those questions into the Q&A box as we go so we can keep the conversation rolling and flowing. So Georgia, thank you, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Andrew, and hello everybody, virtually obviously. Before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge the Badagal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm coming to you from, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Before I ask my colleagues a few tough questions, I thought it'd be just a great opportunity to reflect on what we've heard so far today. I thought Shane Fitzgibbon set the scene so wonderfully with a summary of what communities have faced over the last 12 months. It comes as no surprise because it's been a common theme throughout, from drought to bushfires, storms, floods, pandemic. Just a few things communities across our country have been facing and continue to deal with. With the effects of climate change, we are seeing and will continue to see the impacts of these events become more frequent, devastating, and expensive for communities. Many of us here today, and this might surprise you that someone in insurance spends her day this way, but many of us today spend a fair bit of our time thinking about how can we play a role in supporting community-led disaster resilience? How do we help communities get prepared for and face the compounding impacts of these events, which will test how things have been managed in the past, as we heard Shane talk about. I keep going back as I reflect over the last few days to Alice Hill's opening talk. And to be honest, what I took is a bit of a call to action, that we are all in this together. We need to lean in and help each other. We know the impact of these events are absolutely far-reaching social and economic impacts, from loss of life, damage to property, infrastructure, and of course the long-term social impacts on health and well-being that we see. And again, a common theme that's come through, no one sector has all the answers on how to mitigate the risk going forward. We need to work across sectors. We need to pull in diverse capabilities, perspectives to form a solution. Ultimately, it will require change across the system. Certainly not going to be easy, from revised building codes, land use planning, investment in mitigation infrastructure. Today, what we want to do is we want to share one example of how a group of cross-sector partners, or as Russ likes to call us, the unlikely collaborators, well, nice for us. So from IAG, myself, we've got Jack from NAB, Russ from CSIRO, but also Department of Home Affairs, Resilience New South Wales and Queensland Reconstruction Authority, how we're working together and how we're working differently to try to change one part in that system. And again, over the last few days, we've heard a few times that there's a really clear business case for mitigation. We know that if that targeted investment in disaster risk reduction will significantly reduce the cost of disaster relief and recovery. We absolutely acknowledge there's been positive shifts made in that direction, but the reality is there remains a shortfall of public capital to fund the required mitigation. Now, enhanced investment in disaster risk reduction is commonly seen as a public problem and responsibility. However, as major players in the economy, both IAG and NAB, we understand that we have a shared interest in creating resilient communities. We see that we have a role, along with, of course, government and, of course, with other partners, to try to find a solution. Just want to take a sec to just expand that idea briefly on shared interest. So obviously, greater investment in mitigation will protect communities from the impacts of these events that we've seen. But investment in mitigation can also help reduce the risk people will face to come under a changing climate. If we can collectively reduce the risk, this helps insurance hopefully to be more accessible and affordable as possible, which has flow-on benefits to the broader financial sector. So for example, we often get asked why an insurer and bank are involved, why we're interested in this space. So for banks to lend, assets require insurance. So about, 18 months ago now, IAG and NAB came together to think through how can we work together to ramp up investment in disaster resilience? How could we leverage the great policy shifts, as Michael Crawford mentions, through the establishment of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework, the National Action Plan, and other great state policies that we're seeing in New South Wales and Queensland in particular, and other states. And how do we leverage the growing appetite from the investment community who has a desire to direct capital to fund these type of projects if a return can be secured? So we got together and we decided to develop a pilot and really to test and learn. And for anyone that loves a good problem statement, this is a good one, it's a big one. So we came together to think through, so how might we direct capital, so that could be a range of public capital, but also private capital, to finance new and adapt existing infrastructure that builds community resilience to natural hazards, reduces disaster risk. And again, this is pretty key because to unlock that private capital, it would need to derive a financial return for investors. It's really important to note and to sort of, we're not saying that we have all the answers. In fact, we know we don't have all the answers. And so at that point, IAG and NAB, we started to explore who else we needed to work with. While insurer and the banking industry, we can provide unique insights into the impacts of a changing climate and unique insights into, financing models. This is just one small part of the solution. We don't set the policies, we recognise that. We recognise we don't control the levers required to drive this change and to scale the impact that needs to happen. So for this to be a success, we always knew we had to build out our capabilities of our collaboration. So through our engagement, once we got past the question about why an insurer and a bank were keen to be involved, we soon found out that many shared our goal. And what was really, really great to hear is we're willing to do things differently. So from there, we started to build our capability through the addition of CSIRO, Resilience New South Wales, Department of Home Affairs, and Queensland Reconstruction Authority. While we all shared the same goal, each partner had really different drivers for participating in the pilot and different outcomes they were really keen to realise through the pilot. Importantly, we know we're not going to solve everything through this first pilot, but we have some guiding principles and key things that we're really clear that we want to learn and test. We recognise to build community-wide resilience, we need to take a place-based approach. Funding one project won't build the resilience that is required. We need to support, we need to work with communities and look at, how can this pilot go towards funding a range of infrastructure. So that being your traditional built infrastructure, but really importantly, your social infrastructure, your social capital programs, your preparedness programs, and also the natural and the green interventions that if you actually start combining these different projects together, collectively, how do these build community resilience and reduce disaster risk? We understand this is really complex. We understand that this is going to take some time to work through. We know that it's complex because it's the causes and the consequences are very interlinked, and they require collaboration across sectors to address, learn, and ultimately together we can't create the change we want to see unless we're collaborating to do that. So today, what we're going to do is we're not going to go into a huge amount of detail regarding the pilot, but really, really happy to connect with anyone that wants to hear more about that or get involved. Please reach out. But I have two of our working group members with me today. So Russ Wise, who I'm sure everyone knows, and Jack Pollock from NAB. And what we want to do is just share our learnings in regards to what we've learned through partnering together. And hopefully these learnings will help people that are starting to think through collaborations they're involved in or want to be involved in to address some of these systemic issues. So Jack, the first question's over to you. It's a pretty conceptual idea, what we're trying to do. So I thought it'd be really good if you're able just to give us a sense of, what are we trying to do here through the pilot?
Yeah, thanks, Georgia. And a really big challenge throughout this pilot has been getting people to understand and visualize what we're trying to do. And the challenge with that, of course, is we don't exactly know what this will look like because there are no precedents that we know of. So before we get into what a portfolio of projects in this pilot may look like, the context, as Georgia mentioned, is we know that investors have strong interest in investing in climate resilience and disaster risk reduction where a financial return can be secured. Despite there being massive amounts of capital available, we also know that there is a shortfall of capital flowing to disaster risk reduction and resilience. This is because of the lack of investable projects. And what we mean by investable projects at a very, very basic level are those that can derive a financial return and carry an acceptable level of risk. So in this pilot, we're not just talking about unlocking private capital toward big built grey infrastructure like is often done. We're also talking about directing capital toward investments in social infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And we're looking for these interventions being deployed in a combination that improves community resilience to natural hazards. So to make it a bit more real, here's what it could look like. So take a place that has high flood risk, and after community consultation, a number of interventions are identified to address this risk. These interventions identified include relocating power lines underground in flood-prone areas to reduce inundation risk and disruption to critical infrastructure, as well as restoring mangroves in estuaries to slow the passage of water upstream from private and public assets to protect them from storm surge. These mangroves also have a number of co-benefits in the way of clean water, fishing, and carbon sequestration. So these interventions could be funded through a combination of public and private capital. Satisfying the financial return requirements of private sector investment can be done by defining the benefits, apportioning these benefits to beneficiaries, and then monetizing these benefits where there is a willingness and capacity to pay. In these examples, revenue streams could potentially be derived from the following: avoided loss, costs, and disruptions to business operations from the reduction in disruption to ICT systems in the event of a flood, returns in the form of carbon credits for the sequestration benefits that the mangroves provide, payments by a water authority for improved water quality outcomes and avoided disruption to operations, as well as value sharing from increased economic activity associated with recreational activities like fishing and swimming. So as I said, this is hypothetical, but it is an example of how we see it could work. I guess just in terms of next steps, we understand that this is quite an abstract concept. So the near-term focus of this pilot is finding projects to learn by doing by getting a proof of concept off the ground. Thanks, Georgia.
Awesome, thanks, Jack. Now, Russ, we've got quite a diverse working group. As I mentioned before, we've got yourselves, CSIRO, NAB, us, Department of Home Affairs, QRA, and Resilience New South Wales. Really keen to get your take and learnings from how the working groups navigated the different perspectives and objectives and drivers of these different organisations and agencies.
Thanks, Georgia. Yeah, so from the outset, we've been very conscious that we're trying to create a long-term partnership amongst, as you said, unusual collaborators. So this is where the individuals and organisations involved have little previous experience of working together, particularly to develop novel solutions to the challenging and complex issues associated with disaster risk reduction. And in such situations, we know that there is no substitute for investing time and effort into inclusive processes that develop and sustain shared understanding and trust. So we created a working group comprising organisations who already had a shared appreciation of the real systemic nature of the problem, and acknowledged the need for doing things quite differently. We undertook activities such as workshops, focus groups, and scheduled regular meetings, all focused on co-producing roadmaps of actions to realize agreed outcomes, collaboration agreements, and formalized governance arrangements. And these activities were designed and implemented in ways to create spaces, safe spaces that promoted open discussion, negotiation, reflection, and learning, particularly focused on understanding each organization's motivations, their priorities, their value propositions, constraints, and expectations. It was also done to build the relationships and the norms that would support and enable these to be sustained over time. And so some of the interesting lessons from our experiences so far are that, yeah, there really is general agreement amongst all the partners about the higher level goals, such as the need to increase both private and public sector investment in disaster risk reduction that also generates shared public value and benefit. There's clearly agreement around the need to address gaps in data, policy, standards, strategic planning and preparedness, and analytical capabilities. And there's also agreement that we need to create partnerships between government, business, NGOs, research, in order to realize these outcomes. Yet we also found differences in perspectives about how to realize these goals. And that these differences were influenced by existing roles and responsibilities, by existing short-term organizational priorities, such as budgets, KPIs, etc., and existing experiences and strengths. So a particular focus of our efforts thus far has been to understand and develop shared narratives of what success looks like. And this has involved asking organizational representatives to take off their organizational hat and adopt a broader view to consider what success looks like for the partnership, and then to really explore that what does this actually mean for our respective roles and responsibilities, and for the first pilot project that we'd like to get implemented as a demonstration, and for the portfolio of future projects. So we then focused on working out ways of balancing the differences in the shorter term priorities and needs. So an example of this was making sure that all organizations felt they were benefiting from investing time into the initiative. This has been realized to date by collaboratively identifying and developing products that can be used outside of the RIV partnership for the benefit of all the organizations. And some of these we'll touch on shortly. But also we've been developing a learning framework to identify and share lessons across all the organizations and more widely into the various sectors.
Thanks so much, Russ. Jack, question for you. So I guess IAG NAB started out 18 months ago. We've had other members join us. But what do you think some of the key learnings, the key things, if you were giving some advice to someone about to set something like this up, a collaboration up, what have we learned? What could we pass on?
Yeah, I know you're leading the witness, and I know that you know the answer is a lot. So going back to the beginning, and I will obviously touch on or focus on the learnings through the collaboration, but going back to the beginning, I think something that we quickly became apparent to us is that the vehicle or the financing mechanism is one of the easier parts of this challenge. And so the name of the pilot being the Resilience Investment Vehicle probably puts too much emphasis on the financial mechanism. And I'm sure this initial focus had a lot to do with the fact that the pilot began as a collaboration between NAB and IAG, two financial institutions. So before too long, we realized we needed to reframe the problem, because it's not just about finding a bunch of resilience projects, packaging them up in a financing vehicle and selling this off to investors. We discovered early on that there are a number of systemic barriers to investing in resilience infrastructure. These barriers include the lack of data, frameworks and tools that aid monetization and enable for private investment returns to be secured. We also know that there is limited understanding of resilience investment in the financial sector. And we also recognise that the governance arrangements required and cross-sector partnerships do not exist for this purpose. So all of this made it clear that we needed to bring on different perspectives and organisations to the working group, including, importantly, those that addressed gaps in working group capability. So CSIRO with expertise in data, modelling and learning, Resilience New South Wales, who can unlock policy barriers and provide subject matter expertise, QRA, Queensland Reconstruction Authority, who bring practical experience of funding, resilience and policy, and Emergency Management Australia, which bring that federal level endorsement to ensure alignment to strategic settings in government, including the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework. Of course, these perspectives will also allow us to better define and respond to the challenge. So a couple of things we've learned about collaboration, and I think one that Russ has gone through well is the importance of starting with a shared purpose and goal. And from the beginning of this pilot, we've been really deliberate, made a deliberate effort to be clear on what that shared purpose and goal is. But we've also been really transparent about the different drivers and contributions of each organisation. So both NAB and IAG have made no secret of the fact that, for-profit sector has commercial drivers. And in fact, we see this as a key component of solving for the societal challenge we're trying to address. If we can build a commercial model here, it will allow the private sector to contribute and participate, which will mean bringing the significant capabilities, expertise, and resources, including capital, of the private sector to this challenge, and allow us to unlock private sector's capability to do things again and again, continue to innovate, and do this at scale in partnership with others. So another element of this, the building of strong relationships and trust, which really underpin the whole thing. Russ did mention this, but this really can't be understated, and it does take time. And I think, I realise we don't have too much long left. So I think if I have to pick up from the list, which the most important bits are, is that there's been a recognition more recently, I would say, is that the building of the collaboration and the governance and the tools is not just a means to an end. As Georgia mentioned in the introduction, the aim of this pilot is to prove a concept which can be replicated and the learnings transferred to other contexts. So one of those elements that will allow for this scaling is the model for cross-sector collaboration, and reframing it in this way allows the necessary time and effort to continue to be invested in nurturing the partnership. And really important here is understanding that collaboration is a capability that needs to be built. So I'll finish off there.
Thanks, Jack. And as we love talking about this pilot, we love talking about how we've come together. So I do know we need to wrap up. So what I'm going to do is actually a question that's come through, and it sort of relates to just where to next. So where to next for the pilot, but I guess the call out. So if there's people, listening to this, how could they get involved? How can they contribute to enable the first RIV pilot to get off the ground? So I might, Jack, quick one, and then Russ, a quick one before Andrew boots us off. That would be amazing.
So to accelerate the progress of the pilot, we've engaged 2 consultants to do 2 complementary pieces of work. So one is to identify projects that may be appropriate for inclusion in a proof of concept in the near term, and to understand and address gaps to make these projects investable. All organisations on the working group see the value in getting a real life proof of concept up to learn by doing. The second piece of work is to develop a theory of change, and that will help us to develop a more inclusive understanding of the challenges and opportunities to create a well-functioning resilience investment ecosystem, inform the potential pathways to realising the desired national scale outcomes and impacts, such as identification of opportunities for scaling and new partnerships. And in the spirit of collaboration, our 2 great consultants, Arup and Asymmetric Innovation, stand up every Wednesday with us and share their learnings as well, so that we can make sure the 2 pieces of work really do complement each other and leverage off each other.
I feel like we do have the Oscars wind-up music now. So, and Andrew, would you like us, conscious we're at time, but there's lots of great questions that have come through, and what I'd love to do is, we'd love to actually respond to these questions offline. I know we've run out of time now, but we'll get back to the people that have asked them and provide the feedback, and so we can share that as well.
That would be great, Georgia, and apologies, I feel like the Grim Reaper sort of lurking over in the corner here, but it's a necessity given the timing, so apologies to you, Russell. Looks like Jack's had the last word, but yeah, certainly anything you can provide people after the session, Georgia, on the key question, which seems to be how can we see this thing be successful and how can people help to get it off the ground? I think it'd be really helpful. So thank you. And thank you to all three of you, to Georgia, to Jack and to Russell. Again, a really fascinating session. I think building on some of the other sessions, it's been great to get the different perspectives that we have this afternoon. And Georgia, you did a great job at the outset, summarising some of the stuff that had come before as well. So thank you for that. That really brings us to a close for this session. We have a couple of minutes left as we approach the end of the Knowledge Week, drawing to a close very shortly. And it's been my absolute pleasure to host this afternoon and play some small part in what I think has been a really great session. Some really good, robust discussion, some different perspectives on a number of topics, and I think it's tied together really well around the theme of collaboration and how important it is in all that we're doing in trying to build resilience. So I'd like to just finish and hand over to Amanda Leck, who is the Executive Director of ADA, for a few closing remarks. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you for chairing this afternoon. So as Andrew said, this now brings us to the close of the Australian Disaster Resilience Conference, Disaster Risk Reduction in Action, Pathways to Impact. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in making our conference a success, and that includes our speakers and panellists, our chairs, and the Conference Program Committee. I would also like to thank the ADA team who have put so much work into this year's conference, and in particular to Melissa Matthews, who led the conference program, and Greg Taylor, who has managed all of the logistics. And a special thanks to Andrew from AV1, who have been our technology partners for this year's online event, and we couldn't have done it without you, Andrew. When we started on this journey of transitioning our conference online, we aimed to make it as inclusive as possible, hoping that more people than ever would be able to participate. And that is what has occurred, with close to 1,000 delegates registering to attend a Knowledge Week session. We also were able to offer 77 free sponsored places to volunteers and community organisations involved in disaster resilience. And around 660 people have participated online this week for one of our sessions. We've heard some great presentations, starting with our opening keynote speaker, Alice Hill. We have heard about collaborating for impact, local leadership, community creating change, and today, business fostering resilience. Our panellists were posed the question, what do we need to be resilient to? And just a reminder that all the speaker sessions have been recorded and are available on the ADA Knowledge Hub together with the presentation slides. We will be sending out a survey to you all shortly, and I hope you will find a few minutes of your time to fill it in as ADA uses this feedback to inform how we deliver events such as this to meet the needs of those working to support a disaster resilient Australia. Thank you very much for your attendance and good afternoon.